Welcome to the Outsmart Burnout podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Zaria Rubin, a functional medicine doctor, an international speaker, and a burnout badass because I've been there myself. After walking away from my own high-stress medical career, I discovered how to break free from burnout to reclaim my passion, purpose, and joy. And now I'm here to help you do the same. From science-backed tips to time-saving hacks, and hopefully some aha moments that just might change your life. So sit back, relax, and let's do this. Cait Donovan is one of the most recognized voices in the burnout recovery space. As the founder and host of Fried, the Burnout podcast, top 1% global podcast with over 300 episodes, Cait has spent years helping high-achieving individuals understand that burnout is not a personal failure, but a call to action. A licensed acupuncturist, keynote speaker, and author of The Bounce Back Ability Effect, Cait brings a rare blend of Eastern medicine wisdom, neuroscience, organizational psychology, and hard-won personal experience to her work. She holds degrees in biobehavioral health and traditional Chinese medicine and has supported thousands of individuals, leaders, and organizations through burnout recovery and sustainable performance. Through her advisory consultancy, Burn Bold, Cait works at the intersection of human capacity and organizational design, helping companies reduce burnout not by asking people to do more, but by fixing the mismatches that drain energy in the first place. Cait's work has been featured in Forbes, Oprah Magazine, Thrive Global, and Elephant Journal. And Fried has evolved through 11 plus seasons, from focusing on individual burnout recovery to exploring workplace stress, leadership, and systemic cultural change. I am so excited to welcome Cait Donovan to the Outsmart Burnout podcast. Hello. Welcome.
We're here.
We finally did it. We made it work with our two busy burnout schedules. But, this is one of those interviews that I feel like it could go longer than my typical podcast because we have so much to talk about. Know that you are this incredible burnout expert and really well known in the field. And you have this very popular, fantastic podcast. But I always like to start with folks to take it back to the beginning. What was your own experience that led you to explore this space? Because everyone has a story and it usually starts with their own personal burnout. I know it did for me. So take us back to where it all started.
So I was a practicing acupuncturist for, 15 or 17 years. I lose track at this point. And as a practicing acupuncturist, I was working in Europe for the majority of my career. And so I had moved to Poland to be with my Polish husband when I finished school. And I started a practice in a foreign country in a foreign language with no support besides my husband, no friends, nothing. And because I also did not have the fortune of having parents that could afford to pay for college, I had American-sized student loans that I was paying back when I was only earning at my first job. I was earning the equivalent of about a little less than $20 per acupuncture treatment. And I had $100,000 in student loans to pay back. So I pushed myself really hard. I learned a new language. I learned how to drive stick. I got married. I did all these big life things all at once. I opened my private practice and it absolutely took off. I was the first acupuncturist in Poland to work inside a fertility center. So when I opened my private practice, I was inundated from people around the country that hadn't wanted to be seen at that infertility center, but wanted to see me for fertility work. So I had a 3 to 6 month waiting list. I had anywhere between 50 to 80 patients a week. I was getting phone calls constantly. I didn't really understand business at the time, and I didn't understand that if I had hired a receptionist, I probably would have made more money. I was so concerned with how much it would cost me to pay a receptionist that it didn't compute for me at the time.
So you're answering the phones and making the appointments
everything. And
and
there was
these
no
yeah,
online scheduling,
right, I was
folks.
like, this
This
is in
was
the days before Calendly and
yeah,
Acuity and
like
all
that
that
didn't
jazz.
exist yet.
Right,
So
right.
everything was done manually. And it was a lot. And I was doing taxes in a foreign country and I was just all sorts of things and different rules, different regulations, different styles, different people. About 5 years in, I was tired and I had gained some weight. I got Hashimoto's diagnosis. My thyroid numbers were fine except for the antibody numbers, but still I was gaining weight and things just weren't right. And I was telling my husband, I said, well, we got to get out of here. Like it's Poland's fault that I feel this way. It's crazy to think about now. We moved to Prague. He got a job in Prague. We moved. It's only an hour flight, 45-minute flight from Warsaw, but it's a completely different world. And I was able to work a little bit less. But even still, after a few years, I found myself in that same place where I was like, I'm really tired. And I wasn't just tired. I had a tram stop at the bottom of the hill underneath my apartment. And when I got back from work and got to my tram stop and tried to walk up the hill, it was a 4-minute walk up a hill. It was not far. It was real close. But 2 minutes up, I had to stop and sit on someone's stoop because I was so tired that I couldn't make it. Now, I am a lifelong athlete. I was captain of my field hockey team. I was a competitive gymnast. I'm a competitive rower. I have always exercised. I golf. I cross country ski. I mean, I do it all. Could not function. So that went on for a while and I couldn't quite figure it out. I'm annoyed because I'm an acupuncturist. I should be able to figure it out. I stumble upon a Harvard Business Review article one day and it's talking about burnout. And I'm going, tick, 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 shoot. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back, the realization that had to happen, and the start of the journey.
Wow. So if you hadn't come across that article, you wouldn't have necessarily put the pieces together that you were even burned out in the first place. I think that's so fascinating because it was very similar for me. I justified it in so many different ways. My behavior, my physical symptoms, my mental health symptoms. It's like, I don't know, maybe this is just what adulting feels like. Or, I chalked it up to, well, this is what a career in medicine is. You signed on for this and you don't sleep and you don't have a life and you're just miserable, but never did it cross my mind that I was burned out. I didn't have the vocabulary. And I think if you don't have the language, then you're not going to necessarily get to the answer, get to the diagnosis. It's sort of like availability bias. If you don't
Yeah.
have it, you're not going to come to that conclusion. So thank goodness for that article. But then it comes to, okay, so what do I do about it?
Yeah, so the hard part about that article for me was, as an acupuncturist, you're a stress management specialist. That's most of our job. And most of our schooling is how stress affects the body through the lens of Chinese medicine. And our master's degree is a 4-year master's program. So it's a significant amount of school. I had to see 400 patients before I was allowed to graduate. I sat for national boards. It's a serious it's a pretty serious. It's not a medical degree, obviously, but it's a serious degree. Not knowing that it even existed. I didn't know burnout existed. This was 2016, right? So people weren't talking about it the way they're
Right.
talking about it now. And so I did what I do. I'm a super nerd by nature. I like being nerdy. I will read a research study for fun. And so my husband was doing a postgraduate degree at Cambridge at the time, and I had access to university libraries virtually. So I downloaded every single piece of research that had been done on burnout until that time. But I
Wow.
found a couple of problems. There wasn't that much, to be honest. It only took me
Yeah.
a year to get through.
Right. Right. Oh my goodness.
There wasn't that much. So there a couple of problems came up. Number one, all of the research was done by social scientists. So even still today, about 85% of the research we have into burnout is done by social scientists. So they're not looking at the body. They're not looking at biology. They're not looking at physiology. They're not looking at neuroscience. They're not looking at any of that. So that to me was problematic. I'm like, well, what's my body? I can talk about this all day and I can understand what you're saying, but I can't change my mindset if my biology is off. So that was hitting me wrong. The other thing that was hitting me wrong was that the definition of burnout that was still being developed, right? Because it wasn't put into the World Health Organization until May 27th, 2019. The definition of burnout was developing to be this workplace phenomenon, right? Like this has to do with work. And it said, I remember reading this and being like, what? 80% of the cause of your burnout is your workplace. And I thought, I'm my workplace,
Right. So it's my fault. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what the heck with that?
Mm.
And it wasn't until another article that I came across, thank goodness I read so much, that I was initially real annoyed at. It was like super clickbaity. It said, it was 2018, 2017 maybe. It said chronic stress can shrink your brain, and it was, I think, Psychology Today or one of those. And my eyes rolled all the way to the back of my head. And I was like,
Mhm.
I'm going to read this research article because this journalist doesn't understand medicine and, kind of like on my high horse. So I'm going to read this research article. I went on a 4-month rabbit hole and I was like, shoot, chronic stress shrinks your brain.
Right. And I should have known this. I was a neurologist, right? So this is the irony that we both were in these fields where we're exposed to so much science, and I was exposed to so much neuroscience, and I knew all about the hippocampus and in the context of other diseases and,
Hmm.
in epilepsy and
Hmm.
Alzheimer's and frontotemporal dementia and all of these things, but just garden variety stress, they didn't teach us about that.
No, it wasn't a popular thing at the time, and they didn't have that much research on it. So that led me down another research hole that was, okay, well, what are the long term effects of chronic stress in the body? And that's when I started to pick up, like, okay, well, here's this physiology happening. I know how to deal with that. I know that if my brain has changed, that I need to work on things that build neuroplasticity. And I know what those things are. I've known those things for years. So that's fine. Like I can up meditation. I can walk in the forest. I can do, oh, here's all these things. That's some solution. And then I started looking at, okay, but why is this life that I have that on paper is like pretty spectacular? I've lived in 2 European countries. I speak 4 languages. I'm very successful. I've practically paid off my student loans. I have patients that fly me in for treatments all over the world.
You got this great husband, this great
I got this
life.
great husband, super supportive. I love my family. Like, what?
Mm.
So I started digging into at that point why some people might be stressed out even when their lives are like pretty aligned and pretty okay. And then I did another degree because that one I could not get through in 4 months or a year. I knew there was a lot more to dive into. So I did the biobehavioral health degree at that point. And the biobehavioral health degree was how does stress affect the body through neuroscience, physiology, biology, sociology, genetics and epigenetics, epidemiology, all of it. From every angle, what is happening? And that degree opened up, well, I'll tell you, the 1 week that we talked about burnout, everything was incorrect. But aside from that 1 week, it was really useful. And so I got to this place where I was like, okay, I understand that my behaviors and the way that I'm acting, they're very closely related to how I was raised and trauma that I would not have admitted before I got to burnout. And that trauma probably most likely, this you can't prove this, but probably most likely changed my brain development during my younger years, which means that the things that my brain experienced because of chronic stress, my brain was already on its way to those things before stress happened. So I was prone to burnout, prone to feeling it, prone to not noticing the signs along the way, prone to pushing through, and prone to not choosing health promoting behaviors because of my background. And I thought, well, that's a different story than it's my boss's fault.
Can we just and I take my microphone right now and then drop it because I think this is such an important message that everybody, if you're listening to the podcast, if you're driving, if you're distracted, this is the golden nugget moment that might change your life because it certainly changed mine. And there was a lot longer delay for me in realizing the trauma piece and the nervous system dysregulation piece. And the fact that, why do two people who have very similar lives and very similar careers and, you could be super successful, you can be in the same stressful job, you can have very similar circumstances and one person burns out and one person doesn't. Well, what is the difference there? It might not be the job. It might be the mismatch, which is something that we'll talk about, and I know you're really digging into now, which I think is amazing. And it might be your nervous system. It might be how you're wired. It might be the fact that you've been priming yourself for burnout from the time you were 5 years old. certainly in my case, I had intergenerational trauma, epigenetic trauma. I had garden variety ACEs childhood trauma. I had multiple medical traumas. And then I was just like expected. And of course, in those days, I mean, nobody went to therapy or anything and nobody dealt with it. I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 40s. Had no clue. Burned out long before that. And you're just expected to then function in society in a way that you're already primed for burnout and nobody tells you. You don't know. And you wonder, well, like, what is wrong with me that other people are able to navigate this and I'm not? And then a lot of that self blame comes in and the shame and the feeling that, that you are broken or there is something wrong with you.
Yeah, and that was the entire point for me of Fried when I started it. In the initial episodes long, long ago in 2019, they said, Fried is here to eliminate the feelings of shame, blame, guilt, and judgment around burnout because we can't heal when we're holding on to those things, right? Like
Mm,
we need those things in
yeah.
order to be able to heal. We need to be able to let some of that go. I'm not saying you're never going to feel shame. I'm not saying you're never going to point your finger at yourself or somebody else for something that happened, but just releasing it a little bit around this particular story is what creates the space for you to be able to actually do something about it without beating yourself up along the way. And
Yeah.
that's really important to me.
Yeah. I think there is so much stigma around burnout that people don't want to admit that they have it. They don't want to admit that they're struggling at work because it's the last thing you want to do. Like, oh, I'm going to lose my job or I'm going to get fired or I don't want anyone to know that there's, something wrong with me or maybe my performance isn't quite up to par. But I always say to folks, if you're a perfectionist, which you probably are if you're struggling with burnout, even your decreased level of performance is still going to be pretty darn spectacular. Probably no one will notice but you.
Well, and I think the other problem that people come across, and one of the reasons that we have not been able to move away from the blame and shame, is the definition of burnout, right? Because we're still talking about burnout as an occupational hazard. Now, if you read the articles of the people that were involved in making the decision about what the definition was going to be, according to the World Health Organization, they specifically designed the definition to put the onus on organizations to create better and safer and stronger cultures that would buffer out some of the vulnerability that people have to burn out. But that meant to me, you're taking away people's individual agency massively because you're like, well, this is a workplace problem. So what am I supposed to do? Wait for the workplace to get better? That's not that I can't wait for that. I don't know if
Right.
that's happening
That
or when
moves
that's
at a
happening.
glacial pace, if at all.
Exactly. Right. And then it also puts leaders into this really awkward position of being responsible for your health, which is problematic. Like leaders are not responsible for your health. They should be doing all sorts of things, right? We can talk about all of that. That would be probably another episode. But there's all these things that they can be doing. And yet, at the end of the day, how you react and what you do with those things is still yours. Not to say it's your fault. It's just they can't take a walk for you in the woods. They can't do that. They can't make you go to bed at the right time without too much blue light. They can't do any of that. And then the definition of burnout is not a diagnosis. There is no diagnosis for burnout. So, how are we supposed to admit that we have this disease process that happens to people like cancer, like whatever, when it's not a diagnosis?
Hey, quick pause. If you're a female physician listening to this episode, but your mind is racing, your shoulders are up by your ears, and you often feel like you have heart palpitations, if you're up late replaying a tough case from earlier that day, unable to fall asleep, if you're dreading your next shift and snapping at your husband and kids, you might even be starting to wonder, why did I choose medicine? Did I choose the wrong career? And believe me, I've been there. And I created something tailor made for you, the SOS session, Step Out of Survival Mode. It's a 90-minute intensive single session because when you're stressed and burned out, a long coaching program or endless trainings just feel like one more thing on your to-do list that you can't finish. And I get it. I'm a Harvard-trained neurologist who walked away from clinical medicine for many of these same reasons. In our deep dive session, we'll use my RISE framework. Recognize what's keeping you stuck, investigate your stress patterns, shift your nervous system, and finally learn to embody regulation as your new normal. You'll go from shallow breathing and dreading every shift to finally exhaling, being present with your family, and remembering why you love medicine in the first place. Go to drzaria.myflowdesk.com to learn more and claim your session. Okay, let's get back to the show. I know this frustrates me to no end as a physician with burnout. It's just like, it's crazy.
It's
And
crazy.
the lack of physiologic data is also crazy, that we don't have that research and that we haven't studied, women in particular who burn out at much higher rates and why that is. And girl, we could go on and on. But, I think in your book, the bounce back ability factor, which was great. I read it. I loved it. I think it was really interesting that you focused on sort of these seven causes or contributing factors to burnout. We don't often address those or get into those weeds. Like, it's mostly it's your job, or, oh, you're a stressed out person, and your job's stressful, so ergo you're burnt out. So maybe you walk us through a little bit about that, about some of the underlying causes or root causes that contribute to burnout that people might not be aware of.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that book had 7. And now I have developed something called the Web of Causation of Burnout, which has probably 147. Haven't even counted them because it's too many things.
Ah,
But here's where this idea, first I'm going to give a little background on the Web of Causation idea for those of you who have not studied 1960s epidemiology. So in the 1960s, diabetes type 2 was growing, and people were initially saying, well, you're eating too much sugar as an adult, and so you're getting diabetes type 2. And when they started doing actual research into it, they started saying, okay, well, if you don't have access to green spaces, so you live in a very urban area where there's not a lot of parks or things like that, then you have a higher propensity. So your vulnerability to diabetes type 2 is increased. Oh, if you grew up in poverty, your vulnerability for diabetes type 2 is increased. And if you have a high ACEs score, right, this adverse childhood experiences, the trauma score from childhood, if that's high, more likely to diabetes. If you don't have access to high quality food, or you can afford high quality food, you have a higher tendency to diabetes. If you don't, and all of these things, right? So it became, instead of, oh, you eat too much sugar, you get diabetes, this web of interwoven factors that all compound and intermingle with one another became the new picture of diabetes. And it's where a lot of our public health for diabetes prevention came from. They're encouraging people to walk. They encourage people to go to the doctor regularly. They encourage fresh foods. They encourage, right, all of these things. So I read that and I was like, shoot, burnout's got one too. So I made it. So I created it. And so for me, there's 6 buckets involved. The first bucket is work. And the first bucket is work because we have researched it to death and we know which factors are relevant. So there's 6 factors in the work bucket that are absolutely relevant. I think there's actually 8, but there's 6 in the research. Then to me, we have the culture bucket. Growing up in the United States, if you look up our top 10 American values, 2 of our top 10 values are hard work and individualism.
mm-hmm.
So it's supposed to be hard and you're supposed to do it yourself.
Yep.
Those are going to be burnout drivers. Also in the culture bucket, if you experience any type of racism, anti-Semitism, ageism, sexism, any of those things, you are going to have, please listen to this closely. Your body has a higher level of inflammation and a more active stress response because you are always on edge and waiting for an attack.
Mm-hmm.
If you have experienced, they call them microaggressions, but
Microaggressions. Yep.
they're just aggression. So those things in our culture will make you more vulnerable to burnout, and it has nothing to do with you. That's just a cultural thing. Okay, so we have the work bucket, we have the culture bucket, then we have the family bucket. The family bucket is these adverse childhood experiences, right? So various traumas from either intergenerational or not. That's could be another whole episode. In addition to that, we have parenting styles and attachment styles. So if you have disordered attachment, anxious attachment, etc., you're going to have a higher propensity to burnout. Right, exactly. Right. So there's all of these
As I raise
pieces.
my hand, yes.
Yeah.
Check,
Yeah.
check, check. I feel like I'm
Right.
reading the Harvard article.
Exactly. So we have this family bucket, and then we have a bucket that I call personal health. And it's like if you have a chronic disease, you're more likely to end up burnt out. If you already have a tendency to anxiety or depression, when you experience burnout, you're likely to experience burnout with an enhanced amount of whatever predisposition you already have. If you from the family bucket have some things that were a little messy, you probably aren't great at choosing health promoting behaviors, not your fault, just not something you're good at. So you might drink soda instead of water, you might not force yourself to go out for that walk, you might not choose healthier foods, etc. Right? So there's the health bucket. The less healthy you are, the less regular your sleep is, all of that stuff will give you a higher propensity to burnout. So we have a work bucket, a culture bucket, a family bucket, a health bucket. Then we have the coping mechanisms bucket. We call this the traits and states bucket or the coping mechanisms bucket. And these are all of the behaviors that you created to keep yourself safe as a child that are only dangerous when, and this is a very important nuance, they are only dangerous when they require your self abandonment to exist. For instance, if
Mm.
you are a perfectionist and you need to get something done and you finish a PowerPoint, for instance, and now you're going to do it again to make sure it's even better, and that means that you end up missing 2 hours of sleep when the first version was probably good enough, that's when perfectionism becomes a problem. But say you are my neurosurgeon next week, like don't drop your perfectionism now. Like I'd rather you
Yeah,
not. Right.
yeah.
So I think all of these coping mechanisms get a hard rap. Like we should not be people pleasing and we should have great boundaries and we should not be perfectionists. Listen, folks, I've been doing this work for almost all of my life, and all of the tendencies I had as a child, I still have. But I have learned to notice when they are costing me myself.
They can be adaptive or maladaptive. And, I think that's where you have to
Exactly.
be vigilant about when that line is being crossed.
Yes.
And sometimes it's very blurry.
Sometimes it's very blurry. So we have the work bucket, the culture bucket, the family bucket, the health bucket, the traits and states or the coping mechanisms bucket. And then we have a bucket that no one talks about, I feel like, except for me. And every time somebody says that on my podcast, I'm always like, somebody talks about it. So I'm sure there's somebody out there that talks about this, but the last bucket is environment. So again,
Yes.
if you don't have access to green spaces, if all the lighting in your spaces is too harsh, if you have blue light too late in your world, that's sort of the health bucket and sort of the environment bucket. If your house is painted colors that you hate and doesn't bring you any calm, if you don't use music as a soothing tool in your world, if all of the things that surround us really matter. So I had a client once and we were talking about this factor because I knew she wasn't going to change anything else to start. It was too hard. And she was walking around her house at some point, and I said, "Oh, it's interesting." Like she climbed into her bed, and she said, "You know what? You're talking about all this environment stuff. Here's something weird." And I was like, "Oh, here we go." And she said, "My nightstand is a little bit higher than my bed, and it's square. And every single night when I go to bed, I have a fear that I'm going to knock my eye in my nightstand."
Oh my God.
I said, "Your first job in your burnout recovery is to go buy a nightstand that's shorter than your bed and round." And she was like, "How many thousands of dollars am I paying you for you to tell me to go buy a new night?" We joked about
Right,
it.
right.
But that led to she started using the fancy guest towels instead of the crappy towels she left for herself, so she felt a little luxurious in her household. She bought bowls that were in like 4 different magazines, and they were supposed to be really popular, but they were those bowls that were like big, big plates with the little bowl in the middle. She was like, "There's never enough food, and I always feel like I'm gonna go hungry." Right? She was activating
Yeah,
her stress response all
yes,
day,
all the
every
time
day
through
with
these microaggressions from your environment,
that
essentially.
you built.
Yes, yes. My
right?
gosh, it's just all I can think of also is that being trapped. I mean, I really felt like I was trapped when you work in a hospital environment. So it's all fluorescent lights, first of all, and they're bright and they're
Yeah,
just awful.
yeah.
There's the noise levels are off the charts because it's everything is constantly beeping or blinking or alarming or coding or this or that. The other thing, the patients have windows in their rooms, but the doctors and the nurses, when you work at the doctor's station, the nurse's station, there are no windows and you don't see windows or daylight all day long. And your shift might be 12 hours, it might be 36 hours. And wow, it that affected me. It profoundly, like just this lack of just nurturing environmental factors, the fluorescent lights, the constant noise, the lack of windows, the lack of fresh air, the lack of outdoor, green
The
space,
ugly
etc.
colors and the
The
scuffed
ugly
walls and
colors, yes, the colors were hideous. I mean, some of the hospitals I worked at, let's be real, they were very fancy, but doesn't matter because you're trapped in this environment and you can't get out. And you really start at a certain point to feel like a rat in a maze. And yes, maybe my colleagues, it didn't affect them the same way. They didn't have that same hypersensitivity. I know you talk about this as well in your book about, at baseline, having these hypersensitivities or being a highly sensitive person, which is often scoffed at, but it is a real thing. And I'm sure that there's measurable, neurologic, neuroreceptive basis for it. And it definitely is a factor that is often overlooked, I would say as well.
yeah, and if we just even if we're just talking about like being in trees, trees give out VOCs that help us, breathe and give us oxygen. And if there's this crazy thing that like sunlight hits trees and then tree bark gives out infrared light that charges our mitochondria in our bodies. It's wild, right? It's minimal.
That's
It's like tiny. It's not, yeah, it's like a tiny effect. I'm not saying that it's going to change your life, but there are actual physiological responses that you get from being in nature with the ions of the ocean, whatever nature you're in. It actually physiologically changes how you respond to the world and how your body is feeling. So, environment is so important and it seems to not be part of the conversation often, but sometimes it's the only thing you can even stand to influence in the beginning because you don't have the power for anything else. Like maybe the only thing you do to get started is buy a plant for your
mm,
desk. That
I
will
love
help.
that.
Maybe it's something that's like just you can start with really small things. And I talk about resentment a lot. And to me, it's like, look at all the things that are creating irritation in your house and start replacing those. Are you real mad at your pan because your eggs have been sticking for 6 months? Go to Home Goods and buy a new pan, sister. Like fix the little irritations so that
Yes.
your body doesn't have additional strain to work through over the course of the day.
Yeah. And those things seem insignificant and
They're not.
unimportant, but they add up. They add up and they're cumulative and they can just start to tip the scales. And when you've got so much else going on, in the workplace, you've got to make shifts where you can. And so
Exactly.
I think those things are really important. So I love this shift in the conversation. I think we've had a natural trajectory and arc from talking about like the origins and some of the root causes and some of the realizations or, symptoms and definitions of burnout and how we realize that we're burned out, what's contributing to it. And now we're moving into, okay, well, so what the heck do we do about it? How do we recover? How do we build that resilience? How do we develop the bounce back ability, which is a great word. I think it's hilarious. I love it. So talk to us a little bit about, what that word means to you or what it means to begin that slow process. And oftentimes a lot of people say to me, well, so how long is it going to take? How quickly can I, smart my burnout, mastermind my burnout? I'm like,
12 to 18 months at a minimum.
let me tell you, it's going to be a while. Yeah, exactly.
18
Exactly.
months at a minimum. So we've worked with hundreds and
It's
hundreds
not
of
fast.
clients.
It's
And
not
I had
fast.
one person tell me that they got through burnout in 6 months. And then I had a conversation with her. I was like, that wasn't burnout.
Mm,
You weren't
mm-mm.
all that you caught it early enough.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah. It's sort
get
of a
all the way down the
pre
road.
burnout. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're all the way there, you're not getting through it in 6 months.
Mm-mm,
You're just not.
mm-mm.
It's not going to happen. So This part is, to me, the part where we got to get real gentle. You have to get real gentle with this part because there is no recovery from burnout without safety. So, your first job is increasing your internal feelings of safety however you can. And that might be talking to yourself. That might be, girl, I got you. Listen, I'm going to take care of us best I can. It might be that. I don't know you, so I don't know if that's the right space to start. But without safety, it will not happen. So that's number one. Number two, you said build resilience. I do not believe in individual resilience. I do not think that that is a thing. So in 2003, Shelley Taylor, a high behavioral scientist, did a research study on different stress responses. And, we talk about the typicals all the time, the flight, fawn, freeze. Well, she decided, noted, found that there was another. This last one is called tend and befriend. And those of us with more estrogen tend to do it more than those of us with less estrogen. Tend and befriend, she noted, was part of like if you were in a tribal situation and your tribe was being attacked and your baby started to cry, the only thing you need to do is calm your baby so that you can stay safe and hidden so that nobody finds you because of a baby crying, right? So we learned to tend to one another in order to stay safe. The befriend part is where I think resilience comes from. Resilience is about access and use of resources. So when you are a single person, you only have access to so many resources. It's limited. But as soon as you ask someone for help and open another door, you now have access to their resources and the people that they know's resources and those people's resources. So our job, you have to learn during this process, as painful as it might be, to ask for help in different ways. You are not always going to get it. That is not toxic. Right? People, well, I asked for help and nobody helped me. Okay, first of all, you might have hinted instead of asked because a lot of
Yeah.
people will be like, well, it's real hot in here. Instead of being
Yeah.
like, could you turn up the AC, please?
Yeah.
Right? So let's get clear on what it means to ask. Let's start practicing. I often have people do micro asks. Say, you're not thirsty, but you see somebody walking through the kitchen. You say, could you grab me a glass of water, please? Just to practice asking for things that are risk free and don't mean anything. So you start to train your nervous system that you can ask for things, and whether you get them or don't get them, you're okay. Right? So there's a practice in there. So resilience to me, you build by knowing when and who to ask for support so that your resources increase. So that's another thing. And then there are, from this place, I think, two pathways when you're burnt out to kick off. Either you are so exhausted that you can barely function, or you're tired and real annoyed, like mad, like angry, like mad. So if you are just tired, you don't even have the energy to be angry, you're just tired, we go into that point, we go into something that I call foundational self-care. And this is the unofficial hashtag of my podcast is pee when you need to pee. This is
That's a line in my TED Talk that I say that I learned in medical school that doctors don't pee because I didn't.
right. Pee when you need to pee, drink when you're thirsty, rest when you're tired, move when you're antsy. Just the small things. And sometimes you're going to have to override these things. You're in the middle of the forest in a car, whatever, it's going to happen. However, start doing the little tiny things, paying attention to your body again. We didn't get into interoception today, but this is something that builds a particular neuro skill that will not only help you tune into your body better, but also help you emotionally regulate. Like literally, if you learn to pee when you need to pee instead of overriding that signal, you'll get better at handling all your other emotions. It's why the brain is wild, but this is true. So that's a pathway. But if you're real mad, if you're just real mad, I was real mad. I recommend doing a resentment journal. I sell a resentment journal, right? And that has a very clear process and there are questions to ask yourself and there's this whole plan. But here's the basics of it. You can do it on computer paper. You start taking note of all the things that are get in your goat, things you're mad about, things you're feeling resentful about, ways that you're overspending your energy that nobody seems to notice, all of that. You start writing it down and then you start looking for the patterns. Who are the people that consistently show up? Those are the places you need boundaries. What are the activities that are consistently showing up? those are the ones that need assessing. Do they need to be done? Can you get some help? Could you just let them go? What we've found over the past 10 years is that 10 to 20% of the things that you're mad about doing every day, you could just stop doing and no one would notice. 10 to 20%. If I can buy you back 10 to 20% of your energy, wouldn't you do that? So we go resentment journal if that's the path.
Okay, I love that. I have not heard of a resentment journal, but I think it's definitely something I could have used in the past. But, I think that what people don't necessarily realize is that once you have burned out once in possibly one environment, you are at risk of burning out again in a different environment. And it may be a workplace environment. For me, it was actually, in motherhood. So there are different contexts. And if you, so you can change certain factors and you can change certain environmental factors. And I guess this is what I meant by the word, the word resilience is not quite the right word. It's just the awareness. Maybe it's building the awareness and building your toolkit of, I need to make sure that this doesn't keep happening.
Yeah, so to me then we can go into the interoception, right? Because to me that's what it's all about. So if you had that childhood trauma, et cetera, chances are when your brain developed, you had not as strong interoception as other people. So interoception means, obviously, I'm not telling you
Hmm.
this, the audience. Interoception means internally sensing and internal perception. What are you feeling inside your body, right? This is not your five senses. This is not seeing,
Mm.
smelling, touching. This is, I feel hunger. I feel the need to pee. I feel angry. I feel my jaw clench. The awareness of your internal sensations. And a lot of us don't have that skill. And we don't have
Well,
that skill.
traumatized kids get real good at ignoring those things.
Well, not even ignoring them. We don't develop the skill to begin with because we are tuned into other people's emotions and reactions in order to keep ourselves safe. Right? So, and
Yeah,
these are
that
the
part.
people that are like, I'm super empathetic. No, you're not. You're traumatized and hypervigilant. Like, that's not the same thing. If you are someone who knows how to scan a room and sort of notice how everyone's feeling and even look at micro expressions to like notice, you're always trying to fix things before they go wrong. You're filling up water glasses. You're not even the host. Like you're fixing things for people without knowing why. You probably have a really low interoceptive awareness. Now, if you have a low interoceptive awareness, you are never going to catch the signs of burnout because you're not going to notice that you're getting sick a little more frequently, that your jaw hurts more, that your shoulders are up at your ears, that you're not going to notice the signals of stress happening in your body, not because you're ignoring them, not because you're being flippant with yourself, but because those signals have never had any real value to you before. So, your job, this is why we go down the foundational self care route. When you do the foundational self care route and pee when you need to pee and drink when you're thirsty and all of that, when you go down that route, you are retraining the part of your brain that is responsible for interoception. And the more you do it, the safer you become because the more you become aware of what your needs are. People don't know, like most people that I know that burnt out have no idea what their hunger signals are. They like wait until they're gurgling. Like gurgle is not the first hunger signal.
Yeah,
Most of the
yeah.
time it's a little bit of fatigue or you're focused on a conversation or, I'm in the middle of writing my second book. I'll be like halfway through a paragraph and I'll start to be like, why can't I think of
I
how I
can't
want to
see the
say
words.
this? Yeah, like my brain is empty. I can't figure out where I'm going. Usually that's a hunger signal more than
Yeah,
anything else. I just need
yeah,
sugar. I need blood sugar. Right.
yeah.
So your job as you recover from burnout is not just to fix all these external things and change your job. 80% of our clients stayed in their job. 80%. So you don't have to change your job. You don't have to uproot your life. You do have to adjust some things, buy yourself some space, and then really practice paying attention to yourself so that you don't end up on that same road again. If you do not build interoception during your burnout recovery, you will burn out again. It's not a question of
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I refer to it often as sort of like the check engine light phenomenon of like when that light just flickers on and then goes off and we just ignore that and we just keep pushing it. and then the light stays on and then it goes off and you're like, okay, I'm just going to ignore that. And then it like really stays on and it doesn't go off. And you're like, oh, that light's really annoying. I'm going to put some duct tape over it. It's like we do this. We do this to ourselves rather than really paying attention to that light the first time it flickers on and be like, oh, maybe I should actually use that light for what it's supposed to be used for. And that is a check engine light.
Yeah, and that first flicker is just so much smaller than we know.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's a really small flicker.
Yeah, and it's really about tuning into those things and figuring out what those things are for you, and they
For
might be
you.
slightly different for
Yeah.
every person. So I love all of that, and I know we have so much to cover, but I wanna just shift a little bit because I know that you've made a huge shift in your work and in your podcast and in your focus, moving from more of an individual level, which we focused on a lot in this podcast today, and to more of a larger scale organizational level and more of a mismatch as well. And so I'd love to talk about that a bit and what that means for people who are burned out in their job or in the workplace who maybe do need to leave. And how do you know?
Yeah.
And how do you know what that mismatch is?
So the mismatch is based on the 6 buckets.
Mm,
So this is just a layer that goes on top of the 6 buckets. And each bucket has multiple factors within it, and each of those factors can be matched or mismatched. So if you're a perfectionist, but you use it until self abandonment, that's a mismatch. If you are in a workplace and you've been promoted to a leadership role, but you were not given the skills that you need to do that role well, you weren't trained properly, that's a mismatch. If you work at a place whose values that are written on their wall don't match the values that are acted out in their day to day functioning, that's a mismatch. So if you look at into really deeply into chronic stress research, mismatch is the only word that continuously repeats. When things aren't quite aligned, we have stress. And the more it happens, the more frequently we have stress. It's always a mismatch. And that's true in the body too. We're always going for a match. If you need a blood marrow transplant, you need a match. If it's too hot, your body sweats to bring you back to what your regulatory temperature is. If your immune system creates matches for bacteria that it's seen before in order to keep you safe. Like match is the cornerstone of everything that our bodies do, but we don't think about it in our lives. So how you figure out the question to me is whether to quit or grit is you first do the full workplace bucket. You look through all of the factors and you see how much you can or cannot influence them. Right. So if one of the things is workload and you are a trial attorney, chances that we're going to change your workload are minimal. I've done it before. I've done it
mm,
with a client. We have created a whole different system for her working and it worked, but that's not common, right? And then we're talking about, this skill differential in the workload. When you're underskilled, your workload feels heavier. So can you then advocate for yourself and get some training? If you can, then that will become lighter and your burden from the workplace will go down. But you have to advocate for yourself in that. Right? That's not something necessarily that your leader's supposed to be looking out for. That's your job to say, hey, I'm in this position. I'd love to do it better. Here's some options for training that I'd love to get into, et cetera. Right. So you could do it in that place. The company, if the values are mismatched, so if the company is acting way differently than what's written on their wall, that's not something you're going to be able to fix. And it's not likely something you're going to be able to influence. That's a bounce. That's one of the things that says long term, you can't stay in a place where the values are mismatched, especially so values can be mismatched to multiple places. That first is between the company itself, the next is between you and the company.
mm,
If you had a changeover or a merger or something happened, you have a new boss and you are completely malaligned, it's not fixable. You're not going to fix that. You're different people. You have different values. Values are not good or bad. They're just different. That's a
mhm,
problem. And then we go into in the workplace, is your workplace actually toxic? So for most people, the workplace is not toxic. It is simply mismatched. The workplace is fine. The leaders are fine. It's not good for you, but that doesn't mean it's bad. So, according to the research, in order for a workplace to be toxic, there has to be harassment, incivility, ostracism, and bullying. If And you're like, "Hospitals, huh?"
I'm
Right?
like,
Yeah. So if there
the
is
amount that you put up with
harassment.
as a female physician, yeah,
Yes,
trainee, yeah, ooh, yeah.
exactly. So harassment, incivility, bullying, and ostracism, if those things are present in your workplace, you are not ever gonna be safe enough to recover from burnout. You have got to go. And pretty much almost everything else is fixable.
Hmm. I love it. And now we're going to move even further to a further bird's eye view. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of the cultural shifts and conversations around burnout because I feel like you've been at this for a long time. I know I'm Gen X and the subsequent generations. I feel like the conversation around burnout and around, hustle culture and all of these things is shifting. And what are some of the ways that give you hope in terms of this cultural shift or public discourse? And what are some ways that in the public narrative that maybe concern you about the way burnout is talked about?
I'm a little obsessed with Gen Alpha just being like, "No, I'm not gonna do that."
As the mother of a Gen Alpha child, I can tell you that, yeah,
Listen, you raised them.
it's pretty epic. They're epic. They are an epic generation, and I hopefully they're all gonna save us because they're
Yes.
incredible.
Yeah, so I'm really into that, and that gives me a lot of hope for the future. I think also the even just so I'm a geriatric millennial. So even the generations after me and much younger millennials than I am, so at the end of the millennials and down, what we see there is that people know they have a higher degree of emotional granularity. So they know what emotion words are, they know how to notice and talk about their emotions. They're not afraid to talk about their emotions. There's different levels of safety built into how they interact with one another because they were taught to talk to people differently than we were. So I really love that too because I think the more aware you are, uh, emotional granularity is a skill that is related to interoception, but having a skill where you can not just say, "Oh gosh, I'm mad," but like, "Oh gosh, I'm really disappointed and frustrated." It becomes a different conversation.
Mhm.
I do a keynote on this and I asked somebody to go through this exercise. And she said, "Oh my God, I figured it out." She said, "I got more granular." I said, "Okay, well, what did you learn?" She said, "My husband recently had a stroke and I've been really angry since he got home. But what I realized is I'm not actually angry. I'm just underskilled and I'm frustrated that I don't know how to support him."
Mm,
So now I just have to watch some YouTube videos and like figure out how to do this better, ask some people for help, ask the nurses to show me things so that I feel competent. I feel incompetent to help my husband, and that is breaking my
mm,
heart. And
mm,
she thought she was mad,
mm.
right? So I think that the fact that the generations younger than me have a higher degree of emotional granularity gives me a ton of hope. Things that I'm worried about is that we already have an individualistic culture. And I don't believe in a fully collective culture either. There's a lot of danger in collective culture. You're not allowed to be yourself. I remember first time I was in China, my translator, I said, "Well, did you always want to translate?" And I was 19. I didn't know any better. And she looked at me, she said, "What do you mean want?" And I was like, "Well, didn't you, this is your job. Like, did you?" She was like, "No, no, no. We get told what we're going to do when we're like 7." And I was like, "You don't get to choose what you do?" I was horrified. I get
Yeah.
it now. I
Wow.
understand how the system works for them, but I was shocked, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that this individualistic culture and having our like algorithms really tied into exactly what we want to see and all of that, I think that that's bringing us into a dangerous place because it feels like everybody is supposed to be able to demand a perfect match everywhere they go. Well, if my workplace doesn't match me perfectly, then I'm going to say no. And it's like, well, that's not resilient or bounce backable or any of the things. Like, your life is never going to be a perfect match. We're going for like a C plus. And that's it's like good enough. And I'm a little bit afraid that they are so tuned into themselves that they'll forget how to be with people and will go even further down the individualistic side of things, which I think is harmful long term.
Mm. Yeah, I have concerns around like, technology burnout, political burnout, all of these things. Like we're just in it right now
Well, you
in
know what?
so many ways.
But listen, one of my friends just wrote a book on inner propaganda, the stories we tell ourselves. And
Mm,
one of the things he says in the beginning of his book is like, I was just reading an advanced reader copy. I love that.
mm.
And he says, there was these newspapers were going at it, and then one of them started saying like, well, all this fake news, and we can't believe what we read anymore, and everything is so problematic, and people don't know the truth, and what does the truth mean anymore? And he said, and guess what year it was when these things were written? And you flip the page,
Probably like 1918 or something, or like,
1896.
okay, I was close.
You were. But right, so it's like we talk about these things like they've only been happening now. That's not
Yeah.
true. We're exposed to more things now because we have access to news from everywhere. But the actual problems, it's the same problems. It's the same problem.
The human condition. If you could go back and give your pre-burnout self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Ride the wave. This is going to end up real good for you.
I love that. Oh my gosh. I feel like we could talk forever. There's a fun part of the podcast that I like to do at the end called the rapid fire round, where I just ask you, really quick, fun, rapid fire questions. And, things like, what's a guilty pleasure you will fully defend? Yeah, girl, I'm in my heated rivalry era, so don't get me started on that. That's a whole other podcast. Okay, are you like a beach, a mountains, or a city girl vacation?
All three. I like one of my number one values is something called scope. And scope is the desire to be, feel, and experience different things. Like I don't have a coffee order. I change my mind every time I go. I don't have standards. I
Yeah,
like new and
yeah.
fresh and different.
Oh, yes, I am also novelty seeking a little bit. Yeah. Okay, you've lived in Europe for you just said over like 12 years. What is the best thing that you brought back with you from that experience?
The ability to take vacation.
Yeah, Europeans, they got that down. We really, really need to do that. Okay. What is the most overrated burnout fix?
Gratitude journals. Shoot me now.
Yeah, totally. Oh my God. Oh my God. All right. What do you, Cait Donovan, do when you need to reset or take a break?
I walk through the forest. That's my number one go-to every time.
Yeah, I actually moved from the inner city to the forest. So I am in the forest right now, and it is just so calming and so healing for my nervous system. It's like one of those things that I removed that constant stress, and yeah, it's
And
incredible.
added all the things that trees give us.
Added all the tree magic. Yeah. Okay, complete this sentence. You're not broken, you're just blank.
Mismatched.
I knew you were going to say that. Love it. Okay. So, the women who are listening to this show, presumably, hopefully, they are a lot of high achievers, business owners, always putting themselves last on the list if they're on the list at all. And they may be just like sitting there wondering, am I burned out? Am I stressed out? Am I in the right place or not? Or is this just the cost of like doing business? This is just, like I said, this is what adulting is like. What do you most want folks to walk away from this conversation with?
If you're wondering really hard, you're probably not fully burnt out yet. So it's just stress if you can take a weekend, really relax, and come back on Monday and feeling okay. That's just stress. That's not burnout yet. So that's for those people. For the people that are burnt out, it is literally impossible based on all of the research that I've pulled together over the past 10 years. It is literally impossible that this was your fault. It's impossible.
Mm, I love that. I love that closing statement. Okay, I know that folks are going to want to know where they can find you and how they can connect with you. I know they can listen to your incredible podcast, which is called Fried, the Burnout Podcast. It's on all the platforms. Where else can folks connect with you?
Anywhere they like. I'm easy to find, but the easiest place is caitdonovan.com. I'm also pretty active on Instagram and LinkedIn. Both of those are Cait Donovan Speaks, and Cait is Cait. Just to throw a wrench in your works.
I was just going to say, be careful, folks. It's CAIT. And I'm going to put all of this, of course, in the show notes. And Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming on this show. We so appreciate it. I'm sure my audience appreciates it. And for everyone listening to the show, my goodness, if this episode resonated with you, please give us a like, a review. It really does help the podcast get seen, and share it with a friend. I'm sure you have a friend who could really use this episode and could use this message that, burnout is not your fault. There's literally no way it's your fault. But now we have the opportunity to do something about it. So, and of course, as always, remember, burnout is not your destiny. It's your wake up call.